Okay, this is the first video on becoming a real wizard, and this is going to be good stuff, although some people probably aren't going to like certain aspects of it. Why aren't they going to like certain aspects of it? Well, because they have all kinds of fantasies, and fantasy and reality are two different things. This is not going to fit into your fantasy of what a wizard is. It's not going to fit into what your fantasy of a wizard is. But there are real wizards. And wizard is just a name. And in this case, it's being used by me as a fun name. Let's have fun discovering the wizard in ourselves. And lots of people who might bump into this are already doing things. And some people are going to be horribly naive and have never done anything. And some people are going to come along and they're going to look at the situation and say, oh, this can't be true. I'm going to have fun, schmucking this guy around because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, the thing is, I know what I'm talking about. And at the end of the material, there will be a little link to a website explaining some of the basics, and of course it's got a lot of links to other stuff because that's the way the world is made up. We have the internet, and we have interconnectedness, and so on and so forth. But for example, there's a little essay at that website about the Force, because George Lucas had a good intuition of something, and that's called the ethereal formative forces. And he knew that they were forces that human beings had access to. And that's one of the problems that people are going to have to face who bring in their fantasy idea of what a wizard is powers. We have all these images out there of the smart guy being full of powers. You got Yoda. You got Gandalf. You got role-playing games where there's all kinds of wizards and sorcerers and zapping and stuff. And I'm not going to not tell you about powers. I'm going to tell you where the best books on powers are. But powers can manage you instead of you managing powers. Okay? You go for powers in this life when nobody else has powers, you're going into a karmic cul-de-sac. You're going to get totally lost, and you're going to get really unhappy. All right? And why is that? Well, let's take the word wizard, which I'm applying to a certain kind of thing that a human being can do, become a wizard, a real wizard. Well, what does it mean? Well, if you look it up on the internet, the etymology of it, it's wise. A wizard is wise. And even the etymology is a little bit off because the sources that the etymologists use are dictionaries. You can't go back to the 12th century or the 8th century and meet someone who the people at that time would have called wise. We have fictional remembrances of it, and there's a lot of different ways. If you want to read fiction, I'm going to recommend some fiction. A good place to start for wise fiction about being a wizard would be Marion Zimmer Bradley's The Mists of Avalon, because that talks about a collision, a historical collision between Christianity and the goddess religions in England. And the goddess religions trained priests and priestesses, but they didn't train them to have powers and go zap. They trained them how to be wise. Okay? Now, if you understood the Old English that this comes from, wizard, you'd realize, if you could go back and talk to an actual wizard in those days, that what it means is wise head and wise heart. A wizard is a person who has a wise head and a wise heart. Okay? So that's what On Becoming a Real Wizard is about. It's about how to acquire a wise head and a wise heart. Now, the other thing is that people have real good instincts, A lot of people are already well rooted in going for wisdom. It's just you have to understand where to look for it in your life. You know? Now, one of the fun things I'm going to do, because I want these videos to be fun, is I'm going to share my collection of books with you. Years and years ago, I owned about 3,000 books, and then I had to move, and I cut it down to about 500, and then I had to move again, and now, and move again, and now it's probably about 150. Well, in that, I just didn't abstractly throw away anything. I kept the very best, the very most useful, the most interesting. So I have a wizard's library that's probably unequaled anywhere in the United States of America. I mean, there might be people, out there who do their various things in the world, and they think they got a lot of smart books and stuff. But in my writing, you'll find that those books, those things that you hold in your hand. Let me pick a wise book. Oh, how about, let's see. Oh, this one. This one isn't going to look like a wise book. But here it is. Here's a wise book. Physical and Ethereal Spaces by George Adams. Remember the force? Well, this is about the geometry of the force, of the life force, of the what Rudolf Steiner called the ethereal formative forces. So if you want to be a real wizard and be wise, one of the things you have to respect is that other people know a lot more than you do. And that's why you read books. Because when you read a book, you're meeting another person. You're meeting skill and a content from life that's been put into that book. And you could run around the world. There was a time, anybody that has wandered into Gurdjieff work knows that he wrote a book called Meetings with Remarkable Men, and the fact was that at a certain time he wandered around the planet and he went looking for remarkable men. Now, I had the really grace thing in my biography is I went to a place and time in my 30s that was filled with remarkable men. And this is the culture of Berkeley in the 1960s and 1970s, Berkeley, California. And I went to school there. That was my primary school, and the wise men from all over the world came to Berkeley, California because that was a place to hang out. If you were wise and you wanted to be around other wise people and you wanted to share it, and you could study Sufism and magic and shamanism and yoga and anthroposophy and, tarot. The list was endless. I lived there almost 14 years. And I went to school, I'll tell you. I had to do life, which is a whole other kind of school, and we're going to talk about that in the next video because there are really only two important books that one has to become acquainted with, and they're not books in the sense of something you can hold in your hand. And they're the most important books of wisdom that you'll ever encounter. And one is the book of life, and the other is the book of your own soul. The Greeks said, know thyself. If you're going to be a wizard, you have to know yourself. And I don't mean just your peculiarities. I mean all the universal characteristics that are hidden inside you. Cool stuff.